Why was the woman in civilian clothes standing so calmly at a military checkpoint, staring down two armed soldiers who didn't even bother to salute? The sun was merciless that afternoon, hanging heavy over Fort Henderson's main gate. Asphalt shimmered like a mirage, bending the horizon. A weak flag flapped on its pole, half faded from neglect. Private Miller leaned lazily against the booth window, a bag of chips in his hand, laughter bubbling from his throat as if the Army were a comedy club and not a duty post. Beside him, Sergeant Cole wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered, "Don't get us written up again, Miller." "Relax, Sarge," Miller said with a grin brushing crumbs from his chest. "No one cares about this place. Henderson's a ghost base. No one checks, no one visits." He didn't know it yet, but that belief was about to die a very public death. From the highway came the low hum of an engine, a black SUV, dust trailing behind it like a quiet storm. It rolled to a stop at the gate. The driver said nothing. Then the passenger door opened and a woman stepped out. Civilian clothes, clean pressed, no rank on her collar, no name tag, but her posture that was unmistakable, straight, balanced, controlled. She moved with the stillness of someone who had learned to carry storms inside her and never show them. Miller adjusted his sunglasses, smirking. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." The woman met his gaze without flinching. "I'm aware," she said quietly. "I'm here to report for duty." Cole looked up from his clipboard, confused. Miller snorted. "Sure you are, ma'am, and I'm the president." The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. She didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't move. They had no idea who they were talking to. Fort Henderson had once meant something. A name soldiers spoke with pride, sharp drills, spotless formations, discipline so tight it could have cut glass. But that was years ago. Now its paint peeled, its lawns grew wild, and the sound of cadence had been replaced by complaints. The base didn't fall overnight. It decayed slowly, one skipped inspection at a time, one lazy salute, one shrug instead of a standard. And that was exactly why Colonel Evelyn Reed had come. She hadn't been assigned this place by chance. She asked for it, requested it even, because some commands come to you by order and others by purpose. Her record already spoke louder than rank ever could. 2 tours overseas, multiple commendations, and a quiet reputation for turning hopeless units into something worth saluting again. Her leadership wasn't loud. It was surgical. She didn't break people, she rebuilt them, but only after making them face their reflection. That morning, before she'd reached the gate, she'd studied herself in the side mirror of that same SUV. Sharp eyes. A faint scar near her left temple from an old training accident. That scar had become her favorite teacher, a reminder that even the best stumble when they stop paying attention. As she neared Fort Henderson, the desert opened wide around her, endless heat and silence. She'd been warned about this base. Too relaxed, too informal. Commanders came and went like wind gusts. None stayed long enough to change anything. But Reed had built her career on stepping into the impossible and refusing to flinch. That's why she didn't arrive in full dress uniform or with a convoy. No trumpets, no ceremony. She wanted to see the truth first, the unfiltered version of her new command. So when those 2 slouching guards laughed instead of saluting, she saw everything she needed to know. "Ma'am," Miller said again, spreading his hands like a man humoring a lost tourist, "this is a restricted installation. You can't pass without clearance." Her tone stayed calm, "Then follow procedure." He blinked. "Procedure?" "Yes," she said softly, "the one you were trained to follow." That quiet confidence made Cole uneasy. He stepped forward, voice cautious now. "Let's see some ID, ma'am." She handed him a small leather folder. "Colonel Evelyn Reed, reporting to assume command of Fort Henderson. Here are my transfer orders." Cole froze. Miller leaned over, peering inside, eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, anyone can print that out. I've seen better Photoshop jobs from high schoolers." Cole shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. Reed didn't respond. She simply watched them, calm, collected, patient. The kind of patience that isn't weakness but restraint sharpened by experience. Cole reached for his radio. "Gate control, this is Post 1. Got a civilian female here claiming to be a Colonel Reed. Says she's reporting for command. Request confirmation." The radio crackled, then silence. Miller smirked. "Guess nobody expecting you, ma'am." Reed said nothing. Her eyes drifted to the booth's broken sign, the crooked flagpole, the muddy boots stacked by the door. Details, all of them telling the same story. Standards had died here long ago. Inside, she felt a quiet conviction settle. If this is what the gate looks like, what do the barracks look like? Cole tried the radio again. "Command, Post 1, please advise." No response. The heat pressed down like punishment. Time stretched thin. 10 minutes. 15. The SUV idled quietly behind her, driver silent. Miller kept talking, nervous energy now masked as arrogance. "You know, we've had reporters try this before. Think they can sneak on base for a story. You got any idea what kind of clearance this place requires?" She looked at him, and for the first time her tone hardened just slightly. "Yes, Private, I do." Cole glanced at her. Something about her voice, calm but commanding, made him stand a little straighter without realizing it. 20 minutes passed. Then finally the radio came alive. "Post 1 standby," said a voice from command. "Verifying now." Cole nodded, swallowing dry air. Miller sighed. "You'd think if she were really a colonel, someone would have told us." Cole didn't answer. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted that confirmation to come through. Reed stayed silent, didn't move. The sun baked everything in sight, but she stood firm, eyes steady, posture unbroken. Then the radio clicked again, the voice sharper now. "Post 1, this is Base Adjutant. You are speaking to Colonel Evelyn Reed. Clear her immediately and prepare for escort." The booth went dead silent. Miller's face lost its color. Cole's throat worked, but no sound came out. Reed didn't flinch. She just looked at them both, not with anger, not with pride, just the calm of someone who had seen this moment coming all along. Cole handed back her folder with shaking hands. "Colonel Reed, ma'am." "That's correct," she said quietly. Miller opened his mouth, desperate to say something, anything, but she spoke first. "You've delayed a commanding officer from entering her own base." Her voice was soft. That was what made it sting. "I know you didn't mean disrespect, but that's the problem. You didn't mean it, and still it happened." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. A breeze swept through the gate, lifting dust into spirals. Cole tried to stand taller. Miller's jaw clenched, eyes dropping to the ground. Down the road, engines grew louder. 2 black sedans rolled into view, dust trailing like a curtain call. They stopped in unison. Doors opened. 2 officers in immaculate dress uniforms stepped out, boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm. "Colonel Reed," one barked, snapping to attention. "Ma'am, welcome to Fort Henderson." Miller blinked, disbelief flooding his face. Cole's hand twitched toward his cap, finally remembering the salute that should have been given 20 minutes ago. "At ease," Reed said evenly, glancing between them all. "I noticed the welcome party was delayed." The lieutenant colonel winced. "Apologies, ma'am. Command wasn't informed of your early arrival." "I'm sure," she replied, tone unreadable. Her eyes flicked once toward Miller and Cole, not cruel but cutting through them all the same. Cole tried to stammer an explanation. "Ma'am, we—" She raised a hand slightly. "Save it, Sergeant. You followed the standards as you understood them." She paused, her gaze narrowing slightly. "But those standards are about to change." Behind the booth, younger soldiers peered out, whispering. The story was already spreading like wildfire. The woman at the gate is the new co. Miller's stomach dropped. He'd been laughing minutes ago. Now he wanted to disappear. Reed turned to them one last time before stepping into the sedan. "Gentlemen, your gate is the first line of respect for this base. Yesterday it failed. Tomorrow it won't." Then she left. No anger, no raised voice. Just that simple line, clean, final, unshakable. The convoy pulled away, leaving the two guards standing under the blazing sun, their reflections warped in the SUV's fatting glass. Cole exhaled. "God help us," he whispered. Miller's hands trembled, his earlier arrogance replaced by something else entirely. Shame, maybe, or the first spark of accountability. Cole looked down the road where the convoy vanished. "That woman's going to tear this place apart," he said quietly, "and build it back from scratch." Miller swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said, "and we're the first lesson." The flag above them flapped weakly in the hot wind, but for the first time in years, someone was coming who would make it stand straight again. And though they didn't know it yet, the real rebuilding hadn't even begun. Why was the same black SUV back at the gate before sunrise? The same gate that had mocked her less than 24 hours ago. The desert air was cold this time, sharp against the skin, but the stillness felt heavy, a quiet before inspection. Private Miller's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his uniform cap. Sergeant Cole stood beside him, eyes fixed straight ahead, every button in place, boots polished to a nervous shine. The air around them carried tension, not of fear, but of waiting to be seen. No one had slept easy the night before. Word had traveled faster than the desert wind. The woman at the gate wasn't a visitor, they whispered. She was the new commander. And now she was back. The black SUV rolled to a slow stop. Doors opened. Colonel Evelyn Reed stepped out. Civilian clothes again, no ribbons, no visible rank, only presence. Quiet, sharp, exact. She stood for a long moment, saying nothing. Her gaze moved across the checkpoint like a lens scanning for truth, from the flagpole that leaned 2 degrees off-center to the faded paint along the guard rails. Every flaw told a story. Every crack held a confession. Cole felt her silence before she spoke. It was surgical, cutting without needing a blade. Finally she turned toward them, her eyes calm, her voice soft. "Do you too believe this is the standard of the United States Army?" The question was quiet enough to break bones. Cole swallowed. "Ma'am, we were planning to repaint the rails this week." Reed's gaze flicked to him. "Were you?" He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, eventually." Miller spoke quickly, as if words might save him. "We've been short-staffed, ma'am, multiple shifts." Her tone stayed even, almost kind. "And how much of that time did you spend leaning, eating, and laughing while guarding this post?" The silence that followed was punishment enough. Neither man answered. Reed nodded once, calm and deliberate. "Report to my office at 1600 hours, both of you." "Yes, ma'am." She turned, packing slowly along the gate's perimeter, hands clasped behind her back, boots clicking softly against the concrete. The morning sun crept higher, catching the edges of her hair. She didn't speak to anyone else. She didn't need to. Her presence alone drew whispers. "That's her," one maintenance soldier murmured. "She doesn't look mad." "No," another replied quietly. "That's what's scary." Reed heard them. She didn't react. She'd seen this before, units that had forgotten what pride felt like, soldiers who mistook comfort for peace. When she reached the far end of the gate, she turned back. "When I arrived yesterday," she said, voice carrying just enough to reach everyone nearby, "I didn't see 2 bad soldiers. I saw the reflection of a command that stopped caring. I don't blame you for that, but I intend to fix it." Her tone softened slightly, almost human. "You'll help me do it." Miller blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "Ma'am." "You heard me, Private." She stepped closer. "You were the first to show me what's broken. That means you'll be the first to rebuild it." From her folder she pulled a notepad and handed it to Cole. "By 1600, I want a list of everything wrong with this gate, every detail. Structure, procedure, Discipline. Nothing too small. If something's out of line, I want it written down. Cole nodded fast. Yes, ma'am. Reed gave a faint nod. Good, then we'll begin. Without another word, she turned and walked toward her vehicle. The officers near the admin building watched her pass, standing straighter without even realizing it. No salutes yet, one whispered. Just quiet curiosity. Another muttered back. She's not like the others. No, the first replied. She's calm, too calm. The SUV door closed softly, and the vehicle rolled away, the sound fading into the hum of a bass that was starting to wake up, though not everyone was ready for what was coming. By 1600, Miller and Cole stood stiffly in front of her office door. The hallway smelled of dust and faint disinfectant, like it hadn't been opened often enough to breathe. A small plaque read commanding officer, Call, E. Reed. They exchanged a nervous glance. Miller whispered, You think she's gonna chew us out? Cole shook his head. No, she's gonna do something worse. What's that? Make us soldiers again. The office door opened before they could knock. Enter, came her voice, calm, controlled. Inside, the room was spotless already. Bare desk, one chair, one lamp, no clutter, no decorations. She hadn't even unpacked yet, as if she wanted to earn the right to settle in. Cole handed her the notepad. Reed took it, flipped through the pages, scanning each line in silence. The air between them thickened with tension. Finally she looked up. This is a start. Cole exhaled, relief creeping in. But not enough. She stood, walking toward the window that overlooked the parade ground. You see, Sergeant, she said, her voice low, the gate isn't just a gate, it's a mirror. It reflects the soul of the base. If that mirror's cracked, the image above it doesn't matter. Neither man spoke. Tomorrow, she continued, we begin rebuilding, not with punishments, not with speeches, but with proof. She turned back to face them. You'll run this gate as if every person entering represents the standard of this nation, because they do. Miller nodded hard, throat tight. Yes, ma'am. Cole's voice steadied. Understood, ma'am. She paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. Good. And understand this, respect doesn't start when someone earns it. It starts when you give it. Her words hit deeper than reprimand ever could. Dismissed, they stepped out into the hall. Miller let out a shaky breath. I thought she'd scream, he muttered. Cole shook his head. That's the problem, she doesn't need to. By evening, the sun dipped behind the motor pool, painting everything gold. The base looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Whispers traveled through the mess hall, down the barracks, through motor pool chatter. The new co's different, someone said. She made the gate guys write a report on themselves. No yelling. Nope, just quiet orders, but everyone's sweating. That night, Reed stayed in her office long after lights out. Papers spread across the desk, readiness reports, maintenance logs, training rosters, all bleeding with signs of neglect. She didn't sigh. She didn't curse. She just read, line by line, like a surgeon reviewing a patient chart before the first incision. A base isn't rebuilt with noise, she thought. It's rebuilt with attention. When she finally looked up, her reflection in the dark window stared back, calm, lined, unwavering. She thought of the moment at the gate, the disbelief, the smirks. But under it all, she'd seen something else. Soldiers who weren't bad, just untaught. Forgotten, not failed. That was a difference worth fighting for. The next morning, she didn't summon officers with memos. She showed up. The conference room filled with whoever still remembered how to stand straight. Dust lined the window sills. The fluorescent light buzzed like it resented being there. Reed stood at the front. No podium, no notes. Hands relaxed at her sides. Her silence pulled every stray whisper out of the air. You can't demand respect, she began quietly, until you live it. The line hit like a hammer on soft metal. If the gate is weak, she said, pausing, the heart is weaker. She let the silence breathe. That cinematic beat where eyes meet eyes and no one dares look away. Hear how this works. Her voice sharpened. We build a foundation, standards you can touch, standards you can greet every morning. We fix the small things so the big things have no choice but to follow. She lifted the same notepad Cole had written in the day before. This started with 2 soldiers at a gate. Tomorrow it starts with all of you. She moved through her plan like a mission brief, but quieter, deeper. Cleanliness inspections, not ceremonial, real. Sheets tight. Gear staged for immediate use. If you need a checklist to remember to be a soldier, you'll have one until you don't. A few mutters rippled through the crowd. Someone smirked. Reed's gaze snapped toward him, brief, surgical. The room went still again. Communication drills, she said next. Gate to HQ. HQ to motor pool. Call and response until you can do it in your sleep. We will know who's speaking, who's listening, and who's responsible. The phrase, "I thought someone else handled it," is banned. She stepped closer to the table. Mentorship chains. Every lieutenant has a sergeant. Every sergeant has a private. No one floats. If you show up wrinkled, your chain failed. If you show up late, your chain failed. If you show up ready, she paused, your chain worked. A captain cleared his throat. Ma'am, with respect, that's going to throw off the schedule. The schedule, Reed interrupted softly, will bend. The standard won't. Silence. She turned a page. About the gate, she said. You saw it, you felt it. That was our first impression to the world, and it failed. Private Miller, Sergeant Cole. Chairs scraped. They stood instantly, uniforms crisp now, eyes forward. You stopped me yesterday, Reed said. You were wrong, but you were also the first mirror I needed, so you'll fix it. They nodded in unison. You will draft new security protocols, greeting to clearance, search, escalation, courtesy. You will test them against every scenario I can invent and every one you can't imagine. You will own that gate. When people enter Fort Henderson, they will pass through you. Yes, ma'am, they said, voices steady this time. Reed looked back at the rest of the room. Listen carefully. 4 words, direct personal accountability begins. No one breathed. Then finally she said it, now let's work. That was how the new Fort Henderson began, not with applause but with discomfort, not with speeches but with standards. The soldiers left that room quieter than they'd entered. Some doubted her, some feared her, but everyone, for the first time in years, felt her. And somewhere inside that uneasy silence, respect had started to wake up again. How do you rebuild a broken base? Not with speeches, not with threats, but with movement, one action at a time. The first morning after Colonel Evelyn Reed's briefing, Fort Henderson stirred differently. Not loudly, not quickly, just differently. There was a sense that eyes were watching now, not with suspicion, but with purpose. The kind of awareness soldiers hadn't felt in years. Reed was already awake before dawn, boots laced, clipboard in hand. Outside her office, the air was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that used to belong to discipline. By 5:30, the maintenance sheds were open. Dust billowed out as supply sergeants unlocked bins that hadn't been touched in months. Old mops, bent brooms, faded paint cans, Henderson's forgotten tools of self-respect. Day 1 of her rebuilding plan didn't look glorious. It looked humbling. Miller and Cole stood by the gate, sleeves rolled, sweat already staining their collars. Beside them, a corporal from logistics wheeled out buckets of water and brushes. Cole grunted, I can't believe she's got us repainting rails. Miller smirked weakly. Better than standing there pretending we're guarding something. But deep down, both men knew this wasn't punishment. It was instruction. Reed passed by without a word, her boots clicking steadily against the pavement. She didn't shout orders. She didn't bark corrections. She just watched. And somehow, that was louder than yelling. By noon, the gate looked different. The old gray guard rails gleamed white again. The booth's windows were clean enough to reflect sunlight. Even the flagpole, once leaning, now stood straight, repainted and tightened at its base. Reed stopped beside it, tilting her head slightly as she examined the fresh lines of paint. "Better," she said quietly, "but this isn't about the paint." Miller frowned. "Then what's it about, ma'am?" "Pride," she said, "the kind you don't need to announce." That afternoon, the base echoed with a rhythm no one had heard in a long time, radios clicking. "Post 1 to HQ, radio check." "HQ copies, Lima Charlie." "HQ to Motorpool, status update." "Motorpool copies, 5 vehicles operational, 2 in maintenance." The cadence grew steadier each time, voices cleaner, words sharper. Reed listened with her eyes closed, hands clasped behind her back. Each exchange sounded like a heartbeat returning. "Again," she'd say. And they would, until hesitation vanished, until the sound of connection replaced the habit of silence. Day 2 was about sound. Day 3 was about cleanliness. Barracks that had long smelled of sweat and dust now roared with the sound of scrubbing brushes. Sheets stretched tight enough to bounce a coin. Boots lined up in perfect formation by the door. Not because of inspections, but because no one wanted to be the one who didn't care. A young private stared at his hands, red and raw from scrubbing. His sergeant knelt beside him, showing him the right wrist angle. "Save your strength," the sergeant said. "You'll thank me later." The private nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, Sergeant." Reed watched from the doorway. That was how culture changed. One small correction done with care, not anger. Across the base, mentorship chains began to form. Lieutenants shadowed NCOs. NCOs started learning names again. Not ranks, not last 4 digits, but names. One sergeant who hadn't cared in years sat across from a young specialist in the mess hall. They talked for 2 hours about routine, family, exhaustion, and discipline. The next morning, the specialist showed up early for PT, not because of fear, but because someone had finally noticed he existed. Reed saw it happening. She didn't take credit, she just made sure it kept moving. Her mantra spread quietly. If it matters to the lowest rank, it matters to command. Meanwhile, Miller and Cole were turning the gate into something entirely new. They'd spent nights drafting the new procedures Reed had assigned. What started as scribbles on recycled paper had turned into a sharp, detailed system. Greeting, verification, search, clearance, and courtesy, every step written like choreography. Reed reviewed it line by line. "What do you say before you say no?" she asked. Miller replied immediately. "Good morning, sir or ma'am. Welcome to Fort Henderson." "And after?" Cole answered, "State your business and present your identification for verification. Maintain eye contact. Be firm, not cold. Respectful, professional." Reed nodded slightly. "Tone." Cole's voice leveled. Warm, clear, non-negotiable. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile soldiers earn, not receive. "Good, now make it real." They trained the gate crew for hours. Reed introduced failure drills, fake credentials, late arrivals, angry visitors, unclear orders. The goal wasn't perfection, it was composure. "You control the pace," Reed said. "The uniform doesn't." When a lieutenant tried to slip through without presenting ID, testing the system, Miller didn't flinch. "Sir," he said firmly, "our policy is the standard. I'll clear you the same as everyone else." The lieutenant's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Reed's voice came from 10 feet away. "Excellent," she said. "That's how you lead without rank." The lieutenant swallowed his pride and saluted. Miller returned it, steady, respectful, equal. Cole smiled under his breath. The system was working. Days turned into weeks, sweat turned into pride. Reed's leadership was everywhere, yet nowhere. She didn't hide behind an office. Every morning at dawn, she walked the base unannounced, silent, observing. Her boots made soft sounds against the concrete as she passed formations. her gaze catching every detail. When she noticed a soldier's collar misaligned, she didn't scold. She simply fixed it, one small adjustment, one quiet lesson. "Good morning," she'd say. And somehow those two words carried more authority than some officers' entire speeches. Her path became ritual: PT field, barracks, motor pool, firing range, gate. The soldiers began to recognize her route and made sure their areas were squared away before she arrived. Not because they feared her inspection, because they wanted to earn that silent nod when she passed. Weeks stacked on weeks, the base started to breathe again. Dust disappeared, reports arrived on time, equipment logs balanced, boots hit the ground in rhythm during morning drills. At the gate, Miller and Cole's team had become craftsmen. They moved like clockwork, every ID checked with precision, every radio exchange smooth, crisp, alive. Once, when a convoy returned late from the range, the crew was exhausted, faces streaked with grit. But when a corporal leaned out from a truck and said, "Come on, man, we've been out there 12 hours," Miller just smiled. "Then these next 30 seconds will be the easiest part of your day," he said, continuing the inspection. The corporal's annoyance faded into respect. He raised a thumb as they drove through. No applause, no orders, just quiet acknowledgement. That's how change spreads silently, like discipline reborn. Reed noticed the difference not in numbers, but in air. There was tension now, good tension, the kind that comes from purpose. She heard laughter again in the mess hall, but not the lazy kind, the tired, fulfilled kind, the kind that follows work done right. Her dawn walks grew lighter, not because the mission was done, but because it was shared. One morning, she arrived at the gate and noticed a laminated card posted by the booth window. It read, "We greet with respect. We verify with care. We protect with certainty." No signature, no author. She didn't need one. She knew exactly whose hands had written it and why. Headquarters began to notice, too. Reports were crisper, response times shorter. The forgotten base was suddenly a model of readiness. But Reed didn't care for praise. She cared for proof. When command called to ask what she needed, she said only 3 words: paint, light bulbs, time. They laughed, but they sent them anyway. Fort Henderson was healing the way people do, quietly, cell by cell, until one day you don't recognize the old scars anymore. On a wind-beaten evening, Reed stood alone at the edge of the PT field. The sunset painted the sky in bands of gold and rust. She watched soldiers jogging across the field, boots striking the dirt in steady rhythm. The sound wasn't just training anymore, it was identity. She thought of her first day at the gate, the smirk, the doubt, the silence that followed her name. Now every salute carried that memory, not as shame, but as a reminder. Change had begun with humiliation, but it was ending with honor. She didn't congratulate them, didn't congratulate herself. She just watched. And then, like always, she walked toward the next standard, the next repair, the next morning. Because that's what real leadership does. It keeps walking. What happens when progress gets tested? When the pride you rebuilt meets the first storm strong enough to shake it. At Fort Henderson, 6 weeks after Colonel Evelyn Reed's arrival, the answer came quietly, not with gunfire or alarm, but with complacency creeping back through the cracks. Because no transformation is safe from the past trying to return. It started small. A corporal missed formation. A sergeant skipped a checklist. A few soldiers grumbled that Reed's routines were too much. Nothing major, nothing loud. But Reed had seen enough bases to know, weakness always whispers before it screams. One morning she arrived early at the motor pool. The sunrise hadn't even reached the asphalt yet. She found 3 vehicles left unlocked, 2 without logs updated. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "Who's responsible for this?" Silence. A private shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I think Sergeant Harris." "No," Reed interrupted. "Don't point, answer." The young man hesitated, then took a breath. "I am, ma'am." Reed studied him. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because I didn't check after shift change. I thought someone else handled it." Her tone stayed calm, painfully calm. "We banned that phrase, didn't we?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then fix it," she said simply, "and make sure the lesson lasts longer than the paint on those trucks." By the end of that day, the motor pool gleamed again. Logs were corrected, vehicles checked. Harris apologized to his team in front of everyone, not out of shame, but to set the tone. Reed watched from a distance. Accountability had returned. That's what made her different. She didn't demand perfection, just ownership. And slowly, that ownership began to take root everywhere. Miller and Cole's new security protocols spread like gospel. Other bases started calling to request copies. At the gate, the once slouching guards now moved with precision. Each ID checked twice. Each radio call answered crisp and fast. They even trained recruits, walking them through every step. Miller's patience surprised even himself. "Don't rush the greeting," he'd say. "Respect first, speed second." Cole would nod, clipboard in hand, nodding every detail. "Pride's a rhythm," he'd add. "Once you hear it, you don't forget it." The recruits listened, wide-eyed, disciplined. And Reed, she noticed something subtle. They were no longer guarding the base out of fear of her inspection. They were guarding it because it was theirs. Then came the first real test. It was late afternoon. A windstorm had rolled through the desert, filling the air with grit and low thunder. The sky was the color of iron. The gate crew was tired, double shift, heat fatigue, sand in every crease. They could have cut corners and no one would have blamed them. But they didn't. A convoy approached, returning early from the range. Trucks caked in dust, soldiers slumped with exhaustion. A corporal leaned out from the lead vehicle. "Come on, man," he called, voice cracking with fatigue. "We've been out there 12 hours. Miller wiped sweat from his brow, smiled once, and said quietly, "Then this next 30 seconds will be the easiest thing you do today." He checked IDs, verified manifests, logged each vehicle steady and exact. No shortcuts, no excuses. Reed watched from the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. When the last truck passed, she stepped forward. "Good work," she said softly. Miller blinked. "Thank you, ma'am." "No," she said. "Thank you for proving it's real." Weeks passed. Henderson kept evolving, like a living organism learning how to breathe again. You could feel it everywhere. In the way soldiers stood straighter during morning roll call. In the way reports landed on desks on time, signed clean. In the way laughter in the barracks didn't sound lazy anymore. It sounded earned. The base was changing, and so were the people inside it. Still, Reed never let them forget where they'd started. During one afternoon meeting, she pointed to a photo taped to her office wall, a grainy shot of the gate from her first day, back when the rails were chipped and the flag leaned like a tired soldier. "This," she said, "is where we began. Never let comfort erase it." The officers nodded quietly. She continued, "Standards aren't about looking sharp for inspections. They're about remembering who you are when no one's watching." Her voice softened. "That's what integrity means, doing the right thing when the sun's gone, the radios are silent, and nobody's checking your corners." It wasn't a speech, it was a reminder. And it landed deeper than any regulation ever could. A month later, headquarters sent notice. A regional inspection team was coming, unannounced date, full review. Most bases dreaded that kind of message. Henderson didn't. They welcomed it. Reed's only order was simple: change nothing, do what you do every day. No extra cleaning, no stage perfection. She wanted truth, not performance. And truth, she knew, always passed inspection. The inspectors arrived 3 days later. 4 of them, crisp uniforms, clipboards ready. They walked the base with expressionless faces, checking equipment, reviewing logs, interviewing soldiers at random. Not one corner escaped their eyes. In another time, Fort Henderson would have crumbled under that kind of scrutiny. Now it stood tall. Sheets tight, floors clean, tools locked, names known. When the team reached the gate, Miller and Cole stood waiting. "Good afternoon, sirs," Miller said. "Welcome to Fort Henderson. Identification and orders, please." The lead inspector raised an eyebrow. "You're inspecting us." Cole smiled faintly. "Everyone who passes through this gate follows the same standards, sir." For a long second the inspector stared, then slowly handed over his ID. When they finished, he said quietly, "Impressive." Reed appeared behind them, her voice calm. "It's not impressive, Captain, it's expected." By dusk, the inspection was complete. The team gathered in the command office. Their report was brief but powerful. "Fort Henderson," the lead said, "has exceeded all operational and readiness standards. Clean facilities, functional equipment, disciplined personnel. This base has undergone a full cultural restoration." The room was silent. Then someone exhaled a small, proud sound. Reed didn't smile, not fully, just a nod, one of acknowledgement, not celebration. "Good," she said, "then we're doing our job." That night she walked the base alone. The moon hung pale over the desert. The air was cool, the kind that carries memory. She stopped by her gate, and looked at the booth. Clean, polished, quiet. The laminated creed still taped to the wall. Inside, Miller was on duty, posture perfect, eyes alert. Cole logged entries by lamplight, his handwriting neat, precise. Reed didn't announce herself, she just watched. They didn't notice her at first, and that was exactly how she wanted it. When they finally did, Cole turned. "Evening, ma'am." Reed stepped forward, still awake. Miller smiled faintly. "We try not to miss curfew, ma'am." She chuckled softly, a rare sound. "I can see that." Her gaze lingered on the flag above them, lit by the booth's lamp. "You've done well," she said quietly. Cole shifted. "We just followed orders, ma'am." Reed shook her head. "No, you own them, there's a difference." The wind rustled softly across the fence. For a moment the 3 of them stood there in silence, the desert stretching endless around them. Finally Reed spoke, her tone softer, almost reflective. "Do you know why I came here?" she asked. Neither man answered. "Because this place reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten," she said. "That leadership isn't about commanding the strong. It's about standing with the forgotten until they remember who they are." Miller's throat tightened. Cole looked down, words caught behind discipline. Reed looked back toward the horizon, the faint glimmer of the road where it had all started. "The first day I met you too," she said, "I saw how far this base had fallen, but I also saw how quickly it could rise again if someone believed it could." She turned to them both, eyes steady. "Now it's your turn to believe in someone else." And just like that, she stepped away into the night, her shadow swallowed by the dim light of the post she'd rebuilt from ruin. That was Fort Henderson's new legacy, not a place reborn from orders, but from ownership. Not through punishment, but through pride. Because Colonel Reed hadn't shouted her way to respect. She'd earned it quietly, consistently, one soldier at a time. And the base followed her lead. 6 months. That's all it took for Fort Henderson to become unrecognizable. 6 months since a dusty gate laughed at a woman they didn't know was their commander. 6 months since Colonel Evelyn Reed turned a forgotten outpost into a living symbol of order. The flag above Fort Henderson no longer leaned. It snapped bright and sharp in the morning wind. The lawns were trimmed to precision, the vehicles lined in perfect formation. Every window glinted with polish, every corridor echoed with motion. You could smell discipline in the air now, paint, oil, brass, sweat, the scent of pride returning home. At dawn, the parade field filled with soldiers, lines clean, steps synced, the kind of perfection that used to be rumor and was now routine. A band struck its first note, cameras clicked, headquarters officers in immaculate uniform stood at attention. After 12 long years, Fort Henderson was being awarded the Regional Readiness Citation, a distinction once considered impossible for a base that had been written off as lost. But Colonel Reed wasn't at the front of the formation. She stood off to the side, near the shade of a hangar, hands folded behind her back, watching her soldiers instead of herself. The applause wasn't hers to claim. It belonged to them, the ones who'd painted the rails, rewritten the checklists, swallowed their pride and showed up anyway. When the certificate was presented, the crowd cheered. Reporters snapped photos. The announcer said her name, loud and proud. Colonel Evelyn Reed, commanding officer, Fort Henderson. She nodded once, her expression calm, almost detached. To her, it wasn't victory. It was verification, proof that belief, when carried with consistency, always finds its mark. Later that afternoon, when the applause had faded and the banners came down, the base returned to its rhythm, that heartbeat she'd taught it to keep. And for Reed, that was the real ceremony. By mid-afternoon, the air shimmered again, the kind of golden heat that turns time into glass. At the gate, the same one where this story began, Private Miller stood at his post, uniform perfect, boots aligned to the painted curb. A new recruit stood beside him, mimicking every motion with nervous precision. Miller smiled faintly, remembering his own first lesson, the one that had nearly cost him everything. He adjusted the recruit's stance. Elbows in, shoulders square, you don't guard a gate, he said quietly. You guard a standard. The young soldier nodded, voice low. Yes, sir. Miller smiled. Not sir, just private, but thank you. He turned back toward the road, scanning the horizon. The world outside the wire shimmered under the heat. Then in the distance, a dark shape appeared, a black sedan, rolling steady down the stretch of asphalt. The vehicle approached smoothly, dust swirling around its tires. Sunlight flashed off its polished surface. No prior notice, no radio call. Miller's posture didn't waver. He raised his hand, gate halt. The car stopped exactly at the line. The rear window rolled down. Inside sat a man, older, stern, the kind of presence that carried decades of rank. His uniform was immaculate, his face unreadable. Miller stepped forward, voice calm and clear. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Fort Henderson. May I see your identification and travel orders? The general handed over his credentials, expression curious. Miller examined them carefully, checked the holographic seal, scanned the barcode, verified the number against his registry tablet. Then he returned them with a precise salute. Thank you, sir, he said. Please hold one moment while I confirm clearance. The general nodded, slightly amused. Go ahead, Private. Miller turned to his radio. Post 1 to command, requesting clearance for General Arthur Hayes, Regional Command. The reply came instantly, crisp and confident. Post 1, this is HQ, clearance confirmed, escort en route, over. Copy that, Post 1 out. Miller turned back to the general. Sir, you're cleared. Escort will arrive momentarily. The general studied him, the posture, the tone, the confidence. Impressive, he said finally. Who trained you to run a gate like this? Miller's lips curved slightly, pride flashing in his eyes. Colonel Evelyn Reed, sir. The general blinked, caught between recognition and disbelief. Reed, he repeated, she's your co. Yes, sir, Miller said. Has been for 6 months. The general leaned back slowly, a smile ghosting across his face. I'll be damned. At that moment, the gate booth door opened. Out stepped Colonel Reed, quiet, calm, composed. She wore her service uniform this time, ribbons glinting softly in the sun. No escort, no announcement. She'd been observing the gate from inside the booth, listening to every word, every tone, every pause. The general straightened instinctively, surprise flashing across his features. "Colonel Reed," he said, stepping out of his car. "Outstanding work. This base looks brand new." Reed returned his salute, deliberate and measured. "Not brand new, sir," she said. "Just finally itself again." Behind her, Sergeant Cole emerged with a clipboard, quietly recording shift rotations. He caught Reed's eye for just a second, that silent nod between people who have been through the same fire. She gave the smallest acknowledgement, permission to continue. Traffic kept moving. The gate didn't stall even for the general. That's how Reed wanted it, no interruptions, no exceptions. The standard didn't bend, not even for brass. As the general's convoy rolled through, he glanced around, taking it all in. Every salute clean, every post manned, every movement smooth. "This place used to be a mess," he said. "Now it runs like a watch." Reed smiled faintly. "Watches need winding, sir, every day." He chuckled softly. "And you wind it well." Reed looked toward Miller and Cole, who were guiding vehicles through without missing a beat. "They wind it, sir," she said. "I just remind them what time it is." When the convoy finally passed through, the base settled back into rhythm. Miller finished his last clearance. Cole logged the time. The flag rippled in the afternoon sun, its reflection dancing across the newly polished glass of the booth. Reed lingered nearby, her expression calm but softened. 6 months ago, this was the gate that had denied her entry. Now it was the gate she was proud to pass through every morning. She stepped forward, adjusting the edge of Miller's sleeve just slightly. "Well done, Private." Miller's voice carried steady, "Thank you, ma'am." The words held something they hadn't before, not fear, not formality, pride. Cole looked on quietly, his clipboard tucked under his arm. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile. Reed turned her gaze toward the horizon. "Keep it that way," she said. "Every day the same." "Yes, ma'am." Her SUV waited nearby, engine low, but she didn't move. She stood there for a moment longer, watching the flag wave high over the post that had once forgotten what honor looked like. The same wind that had once carried dust now carried pride. The same silence that had once meant neglect now meant focus. And as the sun began to dip behind the ridgeline, Fort Henderson glowed not from ceremony, but from consistency. The sound of boots, the radio clicks, the cadence of a bass that had rediscovered itself. Later that evening, as twilight cooled the air, Reed walked alone through the compound. Lights flickered on one by one, barracks, admin, motor pool, each one revealing the rhythm of soldiers finishing their duties, not rushing to leave, not cutting corners. She stopped by the PT field. The grass was trimmed, the equipment lined in perfect order. The smell of effort hung in the air. She took a long breath, the kind that carries memory, not exhaustion. The base was quiet now, but alive. Alive in the way discipline makes a place breathe again. Her voice, low and reflective, seemed to blend with the soft hum of the generators. "Respect," she murmured. "It doesn't come from power, it comes from proof." At the gate, Miller watched her from a distance, hands clasped behind his back. The younger recruit beside him whispered, "Is that really her?" Miller nodded slowly. "That's her, the woman they told you can't pass." The recruit frowned. "And now?" "Now," Miller said softly, "she leads everyone who does." As the final convoy of the day rolled in, the flag caught the last light of sunset, red, white, and gold. Fort Henderson stood tall again. No longer the forgotten post, no longer the joke of the region. It was something better, something rebuilt from the inside out. Because one woman refused to shout for respect, she earned it. One gate, one standard, one soldier at a time. That night, under the quiet hum of the base lights, Colonel Reed stood at her office window. The wind outside lifted faint echoes of cadence calls, distant voices moving in rhythm, belonging to a unit that no longer needed to be reminded who they were. She smiled small, faint content. And in that stillness, her moral reflection lingered. Leadership isn't about shouting. It's about showing. It's about caring enough to correct. Believing that respect, once earned, can rebuild anything. The camera of memory would fade out there, the flag waving, the base alive, the desert calm. A post reborn not through power, but through pride. What happens after victory? When the base stands tall again, when the salutes are crisp and the reports arrive on time, what fills the silence that follows accomplishment? For Colonel Evelyn Reed, that silence felt heavier than failure ever did. 6 months of transformation had restored Fort Henderson's honor, but leadership, she knew, doesn't rest on awards. It rests on what you do the morning after the applause fades. She was up before dawn as always, uniform pressed, hair pinned, clipboard in hand. Outside, the air was cool, the first streaks of pink cutting through the horizon. Her daily walk began PT Field Barracks Motor Pool Gate, the same rhythm, the same proof. But lately she'd noticed something new. The base was running itself now. Soldiers were early before she arrived, checklists already complete. Radios clicked without correction. The gate ran smooth without her eyes on it. They no longer needed her hand at every lever. That was the goal, but also the cost. She built a machine that could stand without her, and now she felt the quiet space it left behind. At 900 hours, she entered the officers' classroom for a mentorship briefing, a program she'd started for junior leaders. Today, she was meeting one of the newest additions to the base, Lieutenant Maya Holt. Fresh from the academy, 26, smart, focused, and already walking like someone who had something to prove. Reed recognized that posture immediately, the same one she'd worn decades ago. Shoulders too square, chin a little too high, determination hiding exhaustion. "Ma'am," Holt said, saluting sharply. Reed returned it, eyes steady. "At ease, Lieutenant, sit." Holt did, notebook open, pen already poised. Reed studied her for a moment before speaking. "I read your file. Engineering Corps, second in class, volunteered for Henderson instead of staying stateside. Why?" Holt hesitated. "Because I wanted to serve somewhere that still needed fixing, ma'am." Reed's eyebrow lifted. "Most officers avoid that kind of trouble." "I guess I don't like easy things." That answer earned the faintest curve of Reed's lips. "Good," she said quietly. "You'll fit right in." They spent the next hour reviewing operations, supply line logistics, personnel reports, readiness drills. Holt's questions came fast, precise, unafraid. Reed found herself slowing her answers, not out of irritation, but because she remembered that hunger, the need to understand everything all at once. "Leadership isn't math," Reed said at one point, her tone soft. "It's music. You don't master it by counting beats. You master it by listening to the silence between them." Holt nodded, thoughtful. "So tempo over tempo." "Tempo through tempo," Reed corrected. "Even when it changes, you stay in rhythm." When the briefing ended, Holt gathered her notes, pausing before she left. "Ma'am," she said, "everyone here talks about how you turned this place around. How did you know where to start?" Reed's gaze drifted toward the window, the sunlight glinting off the flag outside. "I started," she said slowly, "where people stopped looking." Holt frowned. "You mean the gate?" Reed nodded. "The gate tells you everything. If soldiers don't care who walks in, they won't care what walks out." She looked back at Holt, her voice dropping quieter. "Find your gate, Lieutenant. Every leader has one, that one small corner where the whole standard begins." That night, as Reed wrote her daily report, she caught herself pausing halfway through a sentence. Her office light hummed softly. The base outside was alive with low chatter, laughter, the clink of utensils from the mess hall. She'd given them discipline. Now they were giving her proof. Still, she felt something gnawing beneath the surface, an old ache, the kind that comes not from exhaustion but from solitude. She'd chosen command over comfort for so long she'd forgotten what either truly felt like. She looked around her office, neat, silent, efficient, and realized it looked exactly like she ran her life, spotless, minimal, and lonely. Her eyes landed on a small frame on the shelf, a photograph from her first deployment overseas, 3 faces in desert camouflage. 2 of those faces were gone now. She touched the frame once, then set it down. "Still here," she whispered. Over the next few weeks, Lieutenant Holt shadowed her closely. Morning inspections, field drills, administrative reviews, Reed made her see everything, not as tasks but as trust tests. When Holt corrected a private gently instead of shouting, Reed nodded. "Good. A quiet voice is harder to ignore." When Holt stayed late to reorganize a faulty supply roster, Reed left her a handwritten note the next morning. "Attention builds credibility. Keep watching the corners." The mentorship deepened. Holt began to understand that Reed's command style wasn't about control, it was about care disguised as precision. And Reed began to realize something else. This young lieutenant wasn't just learning from her. She was reminding her of who she'd once been. One afternoon, a sandstorm hit unexpectedly. Visibility dropped to nothing. Radios crackled. Reed and Holt were at headquarters when the alerts came in. A convoy returning from the range, disoriented in the storm, unable to locate the main road. "Signal's patchy," a staff sergeant reported. "We might lose them, ma'am." Reed's voice cut through the noise, calm as steel. "We won't lose anyone. Route them through Beacon Delta and guide by sound, not sight. Keep comms open, no panic calls." Holt moved instantly, relaying orders, coordinating field lights and flare signals. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then headlights. The convoy emerged from the orange haze, vehicles battered but intact. As the last truck rolled through the gate, Miller's voice came through the radio. "All units accounted for, ma'am. No casualties." The operations room exhaled as one. Reed placed a hand on Holt's shoulder. "That's your first storm," she said softly. Holt looked at her, eyes bright with adrenaline. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" Reed nodded. "Worse storms, same lesson." "What's that?" Reed's gaze turned distant. "Calm is contagious." Later that night, as the sand settled and the moon returned, Reed walked the base perimeter with Holt beside her. The air smelled of dust and diesel. The flag above them hung heavy, still coated in grit. Holt asked quietly, "Ma'am, when do you know you've done enough? That a base or a unit or a soldier doesn't need you anymore?" Reed didn't answer at first. She stopped, watching a pair of privates securing equipment with practiced precision. "When they start doing the right thing when no one's watching," she said finally, "that's when you've led enough." "And what then?" Holt pressed. Reed smiled faintly. "Then you find a new gate." The days that followed moved fast. Holt grew into her role, confident, composed, respected. She started taking morning inspections herself, and Reed would watch from a distance unseen. It was strange, watching her own reflection in younger form, all that fire, tempered now with patience. One morning, as Holt briefed a line of NCOs, Reed caught herself smiling. Miller noticed. "She's good, ma'am," he said quietly. Reed nodded. "She will be better." He hesitated, then added, "Kind of like someone else I know." Reed's smile deepened just slightly. "Careful, Private, that almost sounds like flattery." He grinned. "Observation, ma'am. We're trained to notice details now." Reed chuckled softly. "So you are." Weeks later, headquarters sent another notice. Promotion boards approaching. Lieutenant Holt's name was on the list, a strong candidate for Company XO. Reed reviewed the packet herself, pen tapping lightly against the desk. Her recommendation would seal it. But when she called Holt into her office, she noticed the younger woman's expression, not excitement, but conflict. "You don't seem eager," Reed observed. Holt took a breath. "It's not that, ma'am. It's just, I don't know if I'm ready to lead without you here." Reed leaned back, eyes softening. "That's exactly how I knew you are." Holt blinked. "Ma'am." "Leaders who think they're ready usually aren't," Reed said. "Leaders who question themselves care enough to grow." She signed the papers in silence, then handed them over. "You'll do fine, just remember one thing." "What's that?" "Respect doesn't echo, it radiates. Make sure yours reaches farther than mine ever did." That night Reed walked alone again, her ritual she never abandoned. The base was quiet, save for the low hum of generators and the occasional bark of orders from the training yard. She paused by the gate, the place where everything had started. The booth gleamed under the floodlight, the rails white and straight, the laminated creed still taped to the window. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, older now but steady. Behind her, the flag waved in the moonlight. She thought about the phrase that had once defined her arrival: "Ma'am, you can't pass." Now, the words felt different. They weren't defiance anymore. They were memory proof that transformation begins the moment someone underestimates you. She whispered it once under her breath, almost smiling. "Can't pass, huh?" Then she turned back toward the base she'd rebuilt, voice quiet but certain. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The camera would linger on that image, her silhouette framed against the gatelight, the flag rippling behind her, the desert calm and infinite. What does a soldier do when the mission is complete? But the heart isn't ready to leave the field. For Colonel Evelyn Reed, the answer arrived on a quiet Tuesday, tucked inside a manila envelope stamped with the seal of the Department of Defense. Her promotion orders. It was what most officers dreamed of. A single sheet of paper, written in the language of reward, a transfer to command a larger base, a higher rank, a broader reach. But Reed didn't open it right away. She just stared at it. The ink seemed heavier than usual, like it knew the weight it carried. Fort Henderson was quiet that morning. The sun hung low, the kind of light that turned the desert into glass. Every sound was routine, radios, footsteps, the flag rippling in the wind. And that's what made it hard. This base had finally learned to breathe again without her pulling the strings. The rhythm was steady, self-sustaining. She should have been proud. Instead, she felt the dull ache of something harder to name. Because leaving meant trusting that what she'd built would survive her absence. And trust, for Reed, had always been the hardest order to give. At 800 hours, Lieutenant Maya Holt entered her office, crisp uniform, clipboard in hand. "Morning, ma'am," she said, then noticed the envelope on the desk. "Transfer orders." Reed nodded slowly. "Seems headquarters wants me elsewhere." Holt froze. "You're leaving." Reed didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, watching the training yard below. Soldiers moved in perfect formation. Commands echoed sharp, steady. "I haven't decided yet," she said softly. Holt stepped forward, her voice tight. "With respect, ma'am, this base is you." Reed turned to her, calm, not stern. "No, Lieutenant, that's exactly why I might have to go." Holt frowned. "I don't understand." Reed rose slowly, crossing to the wall where the old photo still hung. The faded image of the gate, crooked rails and peeling paint. "When I arrived, this place couldn't even salute its own reflection," she said. "Now it stands on its own. That means the mission's complete." She paused. "If I stay too long, I become the reason it stops growing." Silence lingered. Holt finally said, "They'll miss you." Reed smiled faintly. "Then I've done something right." She turned back to her desk and finally opened the envelope. The letter was short, formal. promotion to brigadier general, reassignment to Fort Breckland, a failing installation on the other side of the state. The irony wasn't lost on her. Another broken base, another forgotten gate. History, it seemed, had a sense of repetition. For the next few days, she kept the decision to herself. No announcements, no changes to routine. She moved through her duties like always, checking reports, walking the grounds, inspecting shifts. But something subtle changed in her gaze. It wasn't searching for mistakes anymore. It was memorizing. She noticed the little things, the way Cole's pen tapped exactly twice before every radio call, the way Miller adjusted his posture when the flag rose, the way Holt's commands carried the same calm tone Reed once taught her to use. The base had become a reflection of her leadership, steady, humble, human. That Friday, she called an officers' meeting in the command hall. Every department head was there: logistics, maintenance, operations, security. The room buzzed with quiet curiosity. Reed stepped to the front, her expression calm but softer than usual. "I've received new orders," she began. "Effective next month, I'll be transferring to Fort Breckland." The air shifted instantly, chairs creaked, eyes widened. Captain Ross spoke first. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Fort Henderson's just now hitting its stride." "I know," Reed said. "That's why it's the right time." "But—" She raised a hand, the room stilled. "I didn't come here to be needed forever," she continued. "I came here to make sure you could carry on without me." Her tone softened. "And you can." She glanced toward Holt, standing near the side of the room. "Lieutenant Holt will assume acting command of operations during the transition. She'll coordinate directly with HQ." Holt swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, ma'am." Reed nodded once. "Don't copy me, lead your way." Then she looked across the room. "Every one of you has turned this base into something worth believing in. Don't let it fade back into comfort." Her gaze swept the officers, steady, full of quiet pride. "Discipline fades when gratitude stops. Keep being thankful for what this place stands for." No one spoke. The silence wasn't resistance anymore, it was respect. That night, Reed sat alone on the steps outside headquarters. The stars stretched wide across the desert, 1,000 silent witnesses. She could hear the faint rhythm of boots from the training field, the echo of laughter from the mess hall. It was strange, she thought, how peace sounded louder than war. Holt appeared quietly beside her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. She offered one without a word. Reed accepted it, the steam rising between them like memory. "I didn't think you'd actually go," Holt said finally. Reed looked down at the mug. "Every commander leaves eventually. The question is whether they leave a mark worth remembering." Holt hesitated. "You'll be hard to replace." Reed smiled faintly. "Good, that means I wasn't forgettable." The next morning the base moved like clockwork: inspections, drills, vehicle checks, everything flawless. But underneath, the soldiers whispered. Word had spread. By noon, even the gate guards knew. When Reed arrived for her daily rounds, Miller straightened instantly, salute snapping sharp. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight, "heard the news." Reed stopped. "You too, huh?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied his expression, pride mixed with sorrow. "You'll keep this place running." Miller nodded firmly. "Count on it." Cole added, "We've still got your creed taped up in the booth." Reed smiled. "Good, don't ever take it down, not for me, not for anyone." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Miller." "Yes, ma'am." "Next time someone tries to walk through without clearance," her eyes glinted with quiet amusement, "make sure you check their ID." Miller grinned, remembering that first day. "Yes, ma'am, always." As the days counted down, the base began to shift its rhythm, not out of fear but respect. Everywhere she went, people stood a little taller. Work got done before she asked. Voices softened when they spoke to her. Reed never made speeches about it. She didn't need to. She learned long ago, real leadership doesn't need a farewell parade. It leaves behind a pulse, not a performance. The final morning came quietly. Sunrise broke clean over the desert. The flag lifted in the first wind. Reed walked to the gate one last time. Her SUV waited, engine running, but she wasn't ready to step inside yet. Miller and Cole stood by the booth, uniforms immaculate. Holt approached, clipboard in hand, now the officer in charge, standing where Reed once had. "Everything's in order, ma'am," Holt said. Reed looked at her, pride and peace mixing in her eyes. "Then my work here is done." She extended a hand. Holt hesitated, then clasped it firmly. "Thank you, ma'am," Holt said, voice catching, "for everything." Reed's grip tightened once. "Don't thank me, prove me right." She turned toward the gate, stepping past the booth where once she'd been stopped with those unforgettable words. "Ma'am, you can't pass." Now Miller's voice came steady, almost poetic. "Permission to exit, ma'am." Reed smiled. "Permission granted, private." The rails lifted. The SUV rolled forward. And as the base passed slowly in the rearview mirror, she caught a final glimpse, Holt standing tall beside the flag, soldiers in formation behind her, the gate gleaming white in the morning light. Fort Henderson didn't look like a place anymore. It looked like a legacy. In the silence of the road, Reed finally let the weight settle, not sadness, but fulfillment. Command isn't about staying. It's about leaving things better than you found them. And somewhere inside that quiet, she felt the truth she'd been living all along. Respect isn't inherited. It's built with patience, proof, and presence. The desert wind carried the thought like a whisper behind her. Fort Henderson faded in the distance, but its rhythm stayed in every gate she'd ever open, in every soldier she'd ever trust. The road ahead was long, the sun rising higher with each mile. But this time she didn't look back. Because for the first time in her career, she didn't need to. Every ending has a sound. Sometimes it's applause. Sometimes it's silence. And sometimes it's the hum of tires on a long, empty road. Colonel Evelyn Reed listened to that hum as her SUV cut through the desert, toward a new post she hadn't asked for but somehow already understood. The radio crackled with static. The horizon was endless, a streak of burnt gold fading into blue. She'd been driving for hours, alone, convoy lights fading behind her long ago. The farther she went, the more Fort Henderson became memory, not gone, but folded neatly away like a uniform after parade. Ahead lay Fort Breckland, a name whispered at headquarters with the same weariness they once used for Henderson. Neglected, unmotivated, forgotten. Another gate. Another challenge. Another chance to test what she truly believed. That dignity, once taught, can survive anywhere. The GPS beeped once. A sign appeared through the dust. Fort Breckland, authorized personnel only. Reed smiled faintly. Same font, same faded paint, same sagging rails. She slowed as she neared the gate. Two soldiers stood outside the booth, helmets tilted, posture loose, rifles slung carelessly. The first one raised his hand half-heartedly. "Stop right there, ma'am. Can't let you through without ID." Reed put the vehicle in park, rolled down the window. The warm desert air rushed in, heavy with the scent of old oil and neglect. She handed over her identification card silently. The guard took it, frowned, glanced at his partner. Colonel Evelyn Reed." "That's correct," she said, her voice calm. The two exchanged quick, uncertain looks. The younger one shifted awkwardly. "Sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any record of an arrival today. You might want to check in with base operations." Reed studied them for a long second, the smallest trace of irony softening her face. "Let me guess," she said evenly. You're not expecting your new commanding officer." The older guard froze. "Ma'am." She leaned slightly forward, tone patient but unmistakable. "That's me." Silence. Then both men snapped upright so fast their helmets clinked. "Ma'am, I didn't." Reed held up a hand gently. "Easy. You're doing your job at least halfway." Their cheeks reddened beneath the dust. She stepped out of the SUV. Boots hit the gravel with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. "Take me to the duty officer," she said. "And next time a vehicle stops at your gate, look past the dust before you assume what's behind it." The older guard swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." They led her through the gate. Inside, Fort Breckland looked exactly like she'd expected. Equipment scattered, vehicles half-cleaned, soldiers walking without urgency. The flag hung limp, the paint on the headquarters door peeled at the corners. It was Henderson all over again, only this time she didn't feel anger. Just purpose. She knew this terrain now, not the physical kind, the human kind. Inside the admin building, a lieutenant stepped forward, startled by her sudden appearance. "Colonel Reed, ma'am. We weren't told you'd be arriving today." "Good," she said. "I prefer to see a place before it has time to hide itself." She walked through the hallway, past open doors, messy desks, half-drunk coffee cups. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. People felt her presence before they understood it. By the time she reached the operations room, a small group of officers had gathered, unsure whether to salute or apologize first. Reed set her cover on the table. "I won't waste your time with speeches," she said. "I've seen what this place used to be capable of, and I've seen what happens when people forget why they wear this uniform." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "We're going to fix that." No one spoke. They didn't know yet whether she was hope or hurricane. That would come later. That evening, she walked the perimeter alone. Same gravel underfoot, same hum of generators, same heavy air that carried the smell of rust and regret. She stopped at the fence line, watching the horizon fade to amber. In her mind, she saw Fort Henderson again, Miller at the gate, Holt calling cadence, Cole with his clipboard, the flag gleaming white under a rising sun. The rhythm of that bass still pulsed somewhere inside her. And she realized something profound. It wasn't her rhythm anymore. It belonged to them now. And that was exactly how it should be. The next morning began like every first day does, quiet disbelief. Reed stood at the center of the parade ground as the first formation gathered. Lines crooked, salutes uncertain. Her eyes scanned the faces, young, tired, some curious, others defiant. She didn't introduce herself with rank or title. She just asked one question. "Who here believes this base is broken?" A few hesitant hands went up. Reed nodded. "Good. You can't fix what you refuse to admit is cracked." Then she added, "Who here believes it can be rebuilt?" No one moved. That was fine. That's where she always started, silence. "Then you'll learn," she said quietly, "because belief is discipline in disguise." She began the same way she always did, not with threats but with tasks. Every gate repainted, every uniform inspected, every checklist rewritten from scratch. She didn't bark orders, she gave them meaning. When a sergeant complained, she listened, then handed him a brush. "If you hate how it looks, make it better." When a recruit made excuses, she said simply, "Excuses don't polish metal." Little by little, things began to move. And soon, something familiar started to happen, the rhythm. That invisible pulse of order slowly taking hold, like a song finding its melody again. Days became weeks. The sun rose higher, the flags lifted straighter, and for the first time in years, Fort Breckland began to sound alive. The gate no longer sagged, the rails gleamed. The guards stood taller, their greetings sharp and genuine. They didn't know it, but they were repeating history. The same transformation born from the same belief, carried by the same kind of quiet persistence. Reed never mentioned Fort Henderson. She didn't need to. She carried its lesson in her tone, in her patience, in the way she noticed everything but spoke only when it mattered. One afternoon, a young corporal approached her during inspection, nervous, fidgeting. "Ma'am," he said, "how do you keep doing it, fixing broken bases like this? Doesn't it get tiring?" Reed looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Tiring," she repeated softly. "Yes, but so is breathing. You still do it because it keeps you alive." The corporal nodded, unsure if that was comfort or warning. She continued, gentler now. "You can't save every place. You just keep trying because the trying is what saves you." That night she sat at her desk in the new office. The walls were bare, the floor scuffed, but the smell of fresh paint lingered, that scent she'd come to love, the smell of beginnings disguised as repairs. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an old, worn photograph, the one of Fort Henderson's gate, crooked and faded. She taped it to the wall, just like before. Her reflection in the glass caught the light. Older now, quieter, but still carrying that same calm fire. Outside, the guards at Fort Breckland's gate stood at attention. The older one nudged the younger. "You know who she is now." The kid nodded, awed. "Yeah, the one from Henderson, the commander who rebuilt that whole base from scratch." The older soldier smiled faintly. "Guess she's gonna do it again." "Think she'll pull it off?" the kid asked. He shrugged. "She always does, just don't get caught slouching." They both laughed quietly, a nervous, hopeful sound that carried through the dry evening air. Later, as the stars returned over the desert, Reed stepped outside. The wind was cool, brushing against her face like an old friend. She walked to the edge of the road, the same road she'd arrived on that morning. And for a brief moment she closed her eyes and imagined the sound of a familiar voice. Miller's salute, Holt's report, Cole's careful pen strokes. It was all still there, not as ghosts but as echoes. Proof that the things we build outlive the hands that made them. A single tear formed but didn't fall. She caught it with a slow breath, a soldier's steadiness returning instantly. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible, but clear enough to echo against the wind. "They told me I couldn't pass. I proved you can't stop purpose." At dawn, the camera would rise high over Fort Breckland, the flag beginning to lift, the first formation forming in the yard. The same melody beginning again, faint but firm. And as the sunlight touched the rails of the freshly painted gate, a voice, calm, proud, and unmistakably hers, would carry through the narration. "Every post has a gate. Every gate has a standard. And every standard begins with one person who refuses to walk away." She paused. "Sometimes leadership isn't loud. It's patient. It's watching others stand taller because you once stood alone." The camera would fade slowly, the flag bright against the rising sun. Then her final words, soft, resolute, the moral she'd earned through every storm and silence. "Dignity doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't shout or argue. It simply acts until the world remembers how to stand."